Welcome everyone to our first video Sports Viz Sunday roundup. We will look to do these every month as a means of shining a light on sports analytics in the community. And if you want to learn more about the creators, check out our weekly blog at sportsvizsunday.com. We hope you enjoy the July edition of Sports Viz Sunday.
My first pick is quite an untraditional visualization actually, because it's a table. But I still think they're important in visualization land. They're still great ways to convey information. And this one from Lev really sticks in my head because of its simplicity in getting the message across. So it's just looking at men's singles Grand Slam winners, but you can see very easily the point that he's making, which is the rise of Carlos Alcaraz and through his winning of Grand Slams, and actually how that's happened over the last couple of years and how you can really see him starting to potentially turn into another dynasty level men's tennis player like Nadal, Federer and Djokovic, who you can also see in this. And I just think doing it in this table is such a great way to be able to show that in a fairly unexpected sort of method.
Totally agree. And I like the color coordination of it to kind of almost show where there's been overlap. We talk about the big three, but actually Federer started his career probably slightly earlier. Djokovic is now probably outlasting Nadal, and obviously Federer is now retired. And then you see the coming up of Alcaraz. No doubt, 5-6 years down the line, we might see another individual rivaling Alcaraz and Djokovic if he continues to play.
Yeah, I think, and also conversely, the lack of colour for the others again really emphasises the dominance of those three, where you just see individual spaces filled up with Murray and Wawrinka. It just again highlights just how dominant those three players were over that long period of time. Fantastic.
Murray fuming that he didn't get a colour on this one.
Lovely. The next one then, San Lucas Ridgeline. I'm a big fan of like semi-abstract design. I'm going to separate here between like visualization for what I would describe as like work. So this is when for decision-making purposes, and then visualization for enjoyment and for information purposes. And this very much falls into the second one, right? You're not supposed to be able to look at this and ascertain the actual heights of all of the different climbs in the Tour de France stages, but you are supposed to be able to look at it and just understand which ones are mountainous, where are the really big climbs, what is the ebb and flow of the tour and the stages on the tour. And I just think it's absolutely perfect for that. Again, it really hones in onto this one very simple message that you can actually take away quite easily. And it's just really fun to look at. And I think that's a really important part of things. I think you want your viewers to be engaged. You want them to be visually stimulated. You want that little bit of, oh, what's actually going on here? Oh, I get it. To really make them feel like they understand what's going on and to make them kind of part of the experience rather than just they're reading something, they go, yeah, fine, whatever.
I love something that, it has a poster-like feel, but when you don't have to add in an axis, when you don't have to add in the labels, and yet you understand exactly what they mean simply by the actual lines, I think that's a great story.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say that I'm not the biggest fan of Netflix sport documentaries, but I will call out the Tour de France one because it's given me an insight into something that I thought was a little bit boring and very monotonous, into how complicated and strategic it actually is. So yeah, I've become a lot more interested in the Tour de France, and so this one certainly stood out for me, partly because of that Netflix documentary too.
Awesome. And one thing, Mo, that we both liked, which is also Tour de France, was this visual by David.
Yeah, I think this is an absolute stunner. There's so much going on here. And again, it's slightly abstract because a lot of the ways he's chosen to represent these things isn't necessarily naturally how you would think to do that, or certainly not in a radial form. But the elevation, the bars, again, showing the climbs coming around the outside of the wheel, using the spokes on each stage to show the relative finish positions, and then particularly having the cutoff line. There's a real attention to detail to the story of the Tour de France that exists inside this visualization, which means that you can dip into different bits of it and you can go as detailed as you want, or you can focus on little sub-elements without having to consume the whole thing. Or you can actually spend a lot of time with it, really getting to grips with all the different parts about how this, like you say, this incredibly strategic race actually starts to come together. And then the bee swarm at the bottom, just a really, really nice way to, again, bring that extra little bit of flavor to the things that are going on and to where everybody actually finished. Again, drawing out that one arguably most important message, which is who actually won and by what sort of distance.
I mean, I'm a huge fan of radials in general, and I think, not understood straight away until you actually read the radial chart. But there's actually a lot of nice techniques in here, isn't there? With the idea of the cutoff, and then where people were positioned, and then using it for the different levels of elevation, and going clockwise for the stages. Like, these things are still well thought through, well put together. It's not just making a radial for the sake of making a radial.
Yeah, I think from a social media aesthetically pleasing, attention grabbing perspective, it's kind of second to none. I think. I mean, it really does stand out, grab your attention. I think there's definitely an element that you both mentioned where you need to spend a bit of time with it to get into the detail of it. But I think it's done enough to grab our attention to want us or make us want to invest that time to get to know it a little bit better. So it's a beautiful combination, I think, there of giving something that people want to see, but then that tantalizing us with more information if we want to dig deeper.
Awesome. Yeah, and sometimes I don't understand why visualizations that take a bit of time to familiarize yourself with get so much hate. Again, if you're doing it for decision purposes, then that's not ideal, because you don't want your audience to have to spend that time coming up to speed for them to then make a decision. But when it's for conveying information, when it's for visual enjoyment, when it's aesthetic, something like this, I really don't think there's a problem in, as long as it's designed well, like I think this one is, I don't think there's a problem in making something that takes people a little bit of time to get used to. And I think that can actually increase their enjoyment, because they get that aha moment when they get that breakthrough. They feel like they've actually kind of almost earned it. They've contributed something into the reading of this.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Mo. What you said at the beginning, people are taking their thoughts on how business information should be communicated into the world of social media or enjoyment or personal aspects, and the two, I think, are quite different a lot of the time.
Awesome. This is one I picked out. Oddly enough, we have another cycling visual. What I really like about this, again, is just the simplicity to this one. The idea of just, are you trailing? Are you leading? For me, of course, visually, you straight away go to the ones where the lead time is bigger. Which sounds fantastic. So, this individual has been leading for practically the whole race. But actually, I'm sure that the ones where you're going between trailing and leading make for just as an exciting race to watch, where you have someone on your tail. So I like this, and it kind of shows that not every race is the same. You might see multiple winners across the years, but the actual events that led to that win will differ.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of small multiples. I love the way you can just easily scan across and compare and see things. Like you, CJ, the big bars stand out, but also the grey to orange bars as well, where you do get that divergence between the levels. And so it makes it interesting to quickly look through and get a very quick sense of each of those competitions and how dominant the person might have been versus, was it more of a close and exciting race? Yeah, top job.
And I like a visualization that kind of prompts me to go away and look into something a bit more. You can look at some of the races in this where maybe the lead changed unexpectedly or quite late or flip-flop backwards and forwards. And it really actually does makes me kind of go, I wonder what happened there, because it feels like there was something really interesting going on, and kind of want to take that away and go and look into the event in a bit more detail. And I think that's a really cool thing.
And then another one I picked out was this piece by Ben Norland, and on the surface it is just a scatter plot. More goals scored on one axis and more games played on another. And if you have a ratio of probably 1, you're doing pretty good, scoring on average goal a game. And then most things would be something less than that. But for me, it's this idea of this line of showing 1 goal per game, 2 goals every 2 games, humanizing what this ratio would be, that proportion, to then say, okay, here's actually 5 distinct categories that we're looking at, and of course this is focusing on Haaland. But what we could say is, as more games are played, naturally you would assume that ratio would fall, right? Just by number of games played. So looking at the sheer quality of individuals around this region, I think also is something that's kind of like a sub story to Ben's piece here.
Yeah, the banding works really well here, doesn't it? To give you a very clear sense of who's in each category. The longevity aspect is really important as well, isn't it? As you mentioned, CJ, with Messi and Ronaldo, so dominant for so long. I'm also craving, and I don't know whether this was intentional by Ben or not, craving to know who some of the other dots are. And so that's going to draw me into the interactive version to begin to look at the tooltips. Because I can imagine Harry Kane, one of my favourite players, being English, being somewhere quite a long way to the right-hand side potentially. And yeah, it just makes you want to go in and investigate and explore more.
Nice.
Yeah, I think it's excellent. Like you said, CJ, that humanization element just really helps elevate it and change the message that you're taking away from it. It makes it very human readable.
That's it.
Yeah, on to me and my selection. And so this from Damola, I just loved it. The aesthetic appeal to it. We're going back to the Euros, and obviously depending on your nationality, that could be a pleasant or a painful experience. But for me, I just love all the little touches here, to the points where we've got each of the different group players and they won their games and the different coloured icons to represent that. The attention to detail, I think, is really on point. What I love about this, though, is that we've got an interactive element here, so an exploratory dashboard in some cases, but Damola's also added just nice annotations where there's interesting call-outs. CJ, you've got a great example on the screen here of England's expected goal against ratio, which shows us good solid defence. That isn't something you'd necessarily expect to see in a dashboard that's exploratory. So it's the combination of finding things out for yourself, but also interesting points already being noted and annotated for you, which is why I really enjoyed this view.
Yeah, it's a great example, isn't it, of being able to combine that kind of underlying what's actually here, what are the actual numbers, with that kind of human readable bit, so that you can actually give the reader almost a foothold into how to interpret this and take it away. So they don't have to do all the work themselves. They can just take away the broad brush messages, and actually then they've got a way of understanding what's going on without having to sit there potentially kind of scratching their head until it all comes together for them. Yeah, I think it's just great. Really, really good.
Yeah, one of the nicest designs, I think. There's so many just small touches that can really elevate visual, even like shadowing, the use of the colors on the wins and the losses. This annotation here isn't like a Tableau native feature of the way of annotating something, but it's done really nicely to draw just to that one piece. And then of course leaving the how-to readme on the page, I think, is like useful context. So really nice design. This one from Rob brings back memories, because without promoting my work in any shape or form, I did a very similar Lewis Hamilton vid. So this one brought back some lovely memories to me of how it's so easy to showcase a multitude of data in a very nice and simple way. In this case, Rob's visualizing the race wins for Lewis Hamilton, 104 I think he's got now, and by showing each of the tracks that he's won at, and showing those tracks and highlighting specific tracks, certainly based upon his recent win in Silverstone. I just love exploring the different shapes and styles of the tracks. For those who are familiar with Formula One or fans of Formula One, know that no one track is the same, and they offer very different potentials within them. And I also like the timeline on the left-hand side, because again, it's very easy to draw conclusions that Lewis Hamilton has always been dominant, always won races. But as you can see here from the left-hand side, it's very clear that he started off pretty good with McLaren's domination period with Mercedes, but then kind of drops off a cliff at 2022, where he doesn't win for a very long period of time before then coming back on the winners' podium. So fantastic job, Rob, and it gave me some good memories of work I've done in the past.
Yeah, great use of like the track outlines, isn't it, for shapes. Again, it just makes it really visually appealing, visually interesting, and like you said, so if someone like myself, I don't follow Formula One that closely, So being able to actually see the outline of the tracks gives me that extra level of information that I probably wouldn't go and get otherwise, and I wouldn't think could be that interesting. But it just puts it there for me to look at it and be able to add that into my understanding of Hamilton's achievements.
Yeah, I love the abstract kind of idea to it, but even though it's a circuit map at the same time. But yeah, totally right about, the dominance of this section. Wow, fantastic. And then finally, Simon, you picked this one.
I did. And there's a couple of reasons I picked this one. First of all, it's for a completely non-visualization or non-motivated reason. It's really about, I think, the stick that Gareth Southgate got as a manager and as a person during the Euros, I thought was completely unwarranted when you do consider his record. And I think this view does a great job of really emphasizing how good a record in tournaments he did manage to achieve. Now, you might say that was in spite of what he was able to do tactically, but the record is there and it speaks for itself. The other thing that I really liked about this, and Mo, I can't remember if you mentioned it on Twitter or as a follow-up comment, was something about the how to read this Viz guide. I can't remember if you said it's on here or read this below. For me, I didn't need to look at the how to read the Viz guide. I was able to understand it pretty much perfectly from just looking at the flows, looking at the peaks of the performance, and just generally looking at the shape of the data. Even the bandings, which represented the different managers, was easy to follow because you've got them labeled as well. The rosettes indicating, or they roses, indicating the different levels of performance was easy to see. And even the bandings by years and the category breakdowns between the Euros and the World Cups was just all easy to follow. And almost it gave me that sense that not all Vizes that are complicated looking can also be intuitive as well without needing that index, that reference to look at. So that's the main reason I called it out, as well as loving football and I think really trying to highlight how well we have done recently in the past.
Yeah, you've done some complex things within this Vizmo, but made them look very simple on the page, which I think is a fine balance and quite a hard balance to strike. For me, I actually really like not just putting the manager down the bottom, but carrying that reference band color up through the visual, because obviously otherwise you're flickering between the two to say, this person's done well, okay, Southgate's done well as well, but having to double check the manager. I think it's a really clean design, and like Simon mentioned, didn't need the readme, could work it out.
Very kind, thank you. Yeah, I think some of the points you guys have both mentioned, just to talk obviously a little bit about the construction of it. I mean, if you look back through some of my earlier stuff, you'll see me not do some of the things that you guys have called out that you really like about this one. So like carrying the banding through and stuff like that. And so it's nice to be able to kind of learn these lessons and going along and be able to keep iterating on the way I build stuff, and then also get that feedback that, it really does help. Help people understand it, really does increase it and elevate it, but also does give me a lot more respect for the simplicity of other people's, or the work that goes into other people's when they look relatively simple, actually how many tiny design details they are having to make all the time.
Yeah, good point.
So that's it for this month. Hope you enjoyed our favourite sporting moments from July. If you want to get involved, head on over to sportsvizsunday.com, where we write blogs weekly in terms of a roundup of what we see in the sports community.